You know, there's something rather peculiar that happens when you begin to wake up. And by wake up, I don't mean simply opening your eyes in the morning or having a nice cup of coffee. I mean when you really begin to see through the game, when the veil of ordinary consciousness starts to slip and you catch a glimpse of what's actually going on here. It's quite marvelous, really. But here's the thing that nobody tells you. Once you've had that glimpse, once you've tasted that freedom, there are certain things you simply cannot share. Not because they're secret in some mystical hush-hush way, but because sharing them would be like trying to pour the ocean into a teacup. It just doesn't work. And more than that, attempting to do so can actually create more confusion than clarity. So let me tell you about 5 things that if you are spiritually awake, you should never share. Not out of spiritual pride, not because you're part of some exclusive club, but simply because these things cannot be communicated in the way that ordinary information can be communicated. They're more like the scent of a flower. You can describe it all day long, but until someone smells it for themselves, they haven't really got it. Now, the first thing you must never share is your direct experience of awakening itself. You see, the moment you wake up, there's this tremendous urge to tell everyone about it. You want to grab people by the shoulders and say, look, I've seen it. It's all right here. We've been looking in the wrong direction the whole time. But what happens when you do this? The other person looks at you with a mixture of confusion and concern. They nod politely. They might even say, that's wonderful for you. But inside they're thinking you've gone a bit strange. Why is this? Because awakening is not an idea. It's not a concept that can be passed from one mind to another like a recipe for bread. It's a lived reality. It's the difference between reading about swimming and actually being in the water. When you try to describe the water to someone who's never been wet, what do they hear? Just words, just sounds. The actual feeling of water, the way it holds you, the way it moves around your body, that cannot be captured in language. I once knew a man who had what you might call a profound spiritual experience. He was walking in the garden one evening, and suddenly everything became transparent. He saw that he was not a separate being walking through a garden, but rather the entire process of gardening was happening. There was no walker and no garden, just walking, gardening as one movement. Well, he was so excited by this that he rushed to tell his wife. And what did she say? She said, "That's nice, dear. Don't forget to take out the rubbish." You see, she couldn't receive what he was trying to give because she hadn't had the experience. It's like trying to explain the color red to someone who was born blind. You can talk about wavelengths of light. You can describe how it makes you feel. But you cannot give them the direct experience of redness. And spiritual awakening is far more subtle than even that. So what happens when you insist on sharing this experience? You begin to sound like you're bragging. Oh, I've had this marvelous insight. I've seen the truth. I understand what life is really about. And immediately, you've created a division. You've put yourself over here as the awakened one, and the other person over there as the unawakened one. And in doing so, you've actually contradicted the very insight you were trying to share, which is that there is no division, no separation, no you and them. The awakened person learns to be quiet about their awakening. Not out of false modesty, but because they understand that talking about it is like a finger pointing at the moon. The finger is useful if someone wants to look where it's pointing. But if they're fascinated by the finger itself, they'll miss the moon entirely. And most people, when you try to share your awakening, become fascinated by your finger. They want to know what you did to get awakened. They want the technique, the method, the secret practice. But awakening didn't happen because you did something. It happened when you stopped doing and simply saw what was already there. The second thing you must never share is the specific practices or methods that worked for you. Now, this might sound contradictory. Surely if something worked for you, wouldn't it be helpful to tell others? But here's the trick. What worked for you worked because it was right for you. at that particular moment in your life. It fit your temperament, your situation, your particular flavor of confusion. Imagine you have a headache and you take a certain medicine and the headache goes away. Does this mean everyone with a headache should take that same medicine? Of course not. One person's headache might be from tension, another's from lack of sleep, another's from dehydration. The same medicine won't work for all of them. In fact, it might harm some of them. Spiritual practices are exactly like this. What brings one person to clarity might trap another person in technique. I might sit quietly and watch my breath, and in that watching, suddenly see through the illusion of the separate self. But if I tell you, you must sit and watch your breath, you might spend years sitting and watching and getting absolutely nowhere, because your particular knot is different from mine. There was a student who came to his teacher and said, "Master, I've been meditating for 5 years, just as you instructed, and I still haven't had any awakening." The teacher laughed and said, "Perhaps you should stop meditating." The student was shocked. "But you told me to meditate." "Yes," said the teacher, "and now I'm telling you to stop. You've turned meditation into another form of striving, another way of trying to become something you think you're not. Stop trying to be awakened and see if you're not already awake." You see, the moment you give someone a method, they turn it into a goal. They think, if I do this practice correctly, I will achieve enlightenment. And now they're further from awakening than when they started, because they've created a future moment when they imagine they'll be complete. But awakening is not in the future. It's only now. It's seeing what's already here, not creating something new. The third thing you must never share are your insights about other people. When you wake up, one of the things that happens is you begin to see people very clearly. You see through their masks, their pretenses, their games. You can see when someone is operating from fear, when they're defending an image, when they're lost in their own story. And there's a tremendous temptation to help them by pointing this out. But this is almost always a mistake. Why? Because people are not ready to see themselves until they're ready. And when they're ready, they'll see it themselves. They don't need you to tell them. In fact, if you tell them before they're ready, you'll only create resistance and resentment. Think about it this way. Suppose you see a butterfly struggling to emerge from its cocoon. You think, "Oh, I can't help. I'll cut open the cocoon and free the butterfly. But if you do this, the butterfly will die."